Most health systems are woefully unprepared. Very few health systems have really thought comprehensively about how they're going to approach the use of AI within their system.
So welcome to our AI chat room.
Thank you. Yeah.
We're going to go somewhere a little more comfortable, our coffee shop that we start in. I am so excited for this, guys. We work together all the time, but this is a chance for us to talk at the big picture level about what we're seeing going on in the AI space. But first, I want to start with you, Keo, and just tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into digital health.
I guess it's one of these funny things where careers take all sorts of different turns, because I started out doing pharmaceutical litigation. I have just happened to start working with Apple and became one of their senior health products lawyers, leading some of the regulated technology that they've got on Apple Watch, so the software. It's a great time to be in this area.
And Kristi, tell us about yourself.
So yeah, I'm a healthcare regulatory lawyer, and I started working with app developers for healthcare applications, and then now more recently into AI in healthcare and virtual reality in healthcare and all that other fun stuff.
It's changed a lot in the time that we've been doing this.
Well, absolutely, and you threw a global pandemic in the mix, so that will certainly speed up virtual care.
You mentioned virtual reality and augmented reality. What are you seeing on the ground with that?
Where we're seeing that be used more is in terms of like treatments of phobias. So people that have agoraphobia and they are very scared of leaving their house, they'll go through simulations to show like, hey, this is what it's going to feel like if you walk to the end of your street. What happens if you pass some people that are walking their dog? How are you going to interact with them, if at all? A lot of the VR is in that behavioral health environment and conditioning people.
But here, the software is actually doing something directly to the patient.
Yeah, let's talk more about that, because there are some examples like IDX-DR was a famous example of an autonomous device approved by FDA. But that was a while ago now, and there haven't been a lot of autonomous devices out there, much less continuously learning AI. Where do you see the agency's view on that these days?
There's been a lot of talk about that. There's been a lot of talk about trying to bend the existing regulatory framework to make it more iterative, to match the software, to match the ability for AI to adapt, continuously learn. But we're still trying to get there.
By the nature of the process, it's going to take a while. And on the flip side, technology is just developing at such a rapid pace that it's going to constantly outpace whatever the agencies are doing on the regulatory front.
I think that's a real challenge of just the rate of change in AI technology right now. I mean, you look at what Europe did, where they spent more than a year working on a big piece of legislation, and then generative AI comes out. And all of a sudden it's like, well, what does it still apply? What do we have to add? So you're always going to be chasing. I mean, and what does that do to clients who are trying to innovate?
It depends how risk averse a client is, right? I think clients are always looking to other examples. What has been done in this space already? What has FDA already approved? Where are the enforcement actions? If we're doing something that nobody else has ever done before, what is the risk that the agency is going to come along and slap our wrist?
So Kristi, your practice, you deal a lot with HHS and CMS, and Keo, you're oftentimes focused on FDA. How do you guys see these agencies in terms of their temperature right now for innovation?
I think they're open to it and actually quite supportive of it. There's also a lot more, I think, collaboration between CMS and FDA than existed 10, 15 years ago as well.
FDA in particular is soliciting feedback from industry. I think they have been staffing up. They are educating themselves on AI. They are trying to pull that talent in. I would also say that FDA is starting to use artificial intelligence itself. So if you're in regulated industry and you're not using it, you're falling behind. So they see the utility behind it, but they're very open to hearing what else is industry doing, and they're just sort of collecting that feedback right now. They're in a listening mode.
So we've been talking about regulators, we've been talking about healthcare systems. Let's talk about patients. Are patients ready to be treated by AI?
People aren't quite ready for fully autonomous healthcare, but they do like the idea of their clinician having access to that technology to inform the healthcare provider's, treatment plan.
So I think that that's a really good point, because every medical school, in my opinion, right now should be teaching doctors and medical students how to judge AI in the same way that they are taught how to judge a clinical study. I'm going to look at the limitations. I'm going to look at the sample size. I'm going to look at the power. I'm going to look at all kinds of things, and I'm going to weigh it against other trials. And I think that kind of discernment needs to go to AI. I guess that leads us to labeling. What is FDA saying about what ought to be on an AI device label?
A lot, I think. And interestingly, they have thoughts on that, whether it's a regulated piece of software or whether it's not even regulated, which is a very strange area to be in, where FDA is effectively mandating labeling for something that they do not regulate.
It's a bit of a jurisdictional Mobius strip there.
But I think the discussion gets even more interesting when you think about lots of these tools aren't even used, or may not just be used, by the physician. They might be used directly by patients. So you have a whole different audience then, and they're not going through medical school.
The draft guidance that you were talking about from FDA on clinical decision support software, it had a section on what you were just talking about, direct to patients. And that seems like that's gone now in the final guidance. What do you make of that?
That was the big part of the back step that was made by FDA. And to be honest, they hung their hat on the fact that that wasn't in the legislation. That wasn't supposed to be carved out. It seems to be higher risk going direct to a patient, and they don't have the intermediary of a physician to help communicate or interpret what the software is doing. So I think that does make some sense, but it's very difficult to take something away from a group of people that have previously thought that they had that benefit.
So Kristi, are healthcare systems ready for AI adoption?
Not right now. I think most health systems are woefully unprepared. If there is a policy or two floating around out there, it's probably going to be specific to a certain device, maybe for use in a certain department. But I think very few health systems have really thought comprehensively about how they're going to approach the use of AI within their system, and built out governance programs to not only know what AI tools are available and being used, but also how are they monitored, how are they tested, what policies and safeguards do we want to put around them. I haven't seen any health systems come up with something that comprehensive. If you look at your typical health system, you're looking at a pretty small legal department and even smaller compliance department. And maybe you've got a separate privacy officer, but oftentimes the privacy officer is going to sit under compliance. And it's just much smaller scale. They just don't have the same level of resources to be able to address it in the same manner.
It doesn't have to all fall on the healthcare system, but I do feel like if you're going to use AI, you have to get that level of education to say, okay, let's make sure it's been tuned for our locality. Let's make sure that we know who's responsible to look out for drift, to look out for bias, because someone can do it.
Yeah, I think that's really where this space is moving to. There's a real focus on clinical validation needs to happen in the same environment as tool deployment. You need to see that machine-human interface, and you don't see the bias often, or you don't see the errors, all of them, until you've done that sort of in-situ testing.
So I want to take you guys to the future a little bit, and we'll speculate. I am hopeful that with AI and access to good quality healthcare data, we're heading towards a point where we can have precision medicine, biosynthesized pills for specific patients for their specific disease states. And what I want to do is ask, are any regulators thinking about this, and how are they going to manage it?
I think yes is the answer to that. We've just seen the European Medicines Agency come out with a reflection paper on artificial intelligence.
Well, I think that's huge because typically you have the regulatory agencies chasing technology. And as we sit here today, the precision medicine world that you're envisioning, Danny, does not exist. But we do have the EMA thinking about it, knowing that that is on the horizon and that is a target and we might get there. So to have the regulators having that sort of foresight is great. I mean, it shows great planning, and hopefully, maybe they will be more prepared for that day when that is a possibility. But I guess, to your point, how are you going to, clinically validate something that is tailored to one individual?
That is the million-dollar question. I imagine that we are going towards a stage where regulatory oversight, at least for things like that, will have to be procedural rather than the specific output.
You could probably postulate the same thing for generative AI or general AI, which is we could test it some, but are we going to test all of the outputs? Probably not. It's going to be the procedure. It's going to be how it was developed.
So I want to take us home and talk about something near and dear to all our hearts, which is the clinical trial, how we get to all these exciting new therapies. And Keo, you mentioned earlier that FDA is using artificial intelligence on their side. What about sponsors? How are you seeing AI help the clinical trial process?
Optimizing the selection of participants, or optimizing the selection of sites where you might be performing the clinical trials. So maybe we could also solve our clinical trial diversity problem by decentralizing, because you could open up your trial to a greater number of people.
I think it could also help with both speed and quality. Just with clinical trials, you've got a lot of data that needs to be reviewed, and AI could come in, obviously review all those medical records, all that clinical trial data much faster than a human could. It probably also identify some patterns in that data that a human might not be able to identify. So I think it could probably, speed up a process that may be years in the making and kind of cut that down a little bit, as well as potentially identify, some side effects that are not obvious, perhaps, to a human eye.
Well, I, for one, am a huge optimist about all the medical advances that we're going to be seeing in the next decade. Thank you guys for joining us. It was a great conversation. And until next time on AI ChatRoom, thank you for being here.
Yep, thank you. It was awesome.